Here's a paradox for you. The most expressive instrument ever built, the one that can whisper, sing, thunder, and weep, it's also one of the most complex mechanical objects in your home. Around 12,000 individual parts, and the goal of every single one of them is to make you forget they exist. Welcome to Living Pianos. Robert Estrin here, and today I want to take you inside the machine that most pianists play for decades without ever truly understanding. Think about what happens when you sit down at a great piano, you press a key, a sound comes out. Simple, right? But between your finger and those strings, something extraordinary is happening. A chain of mechanical events designed, regulated, and balanced to tolerances measured in fractions of a millimeter, fires in sequence in less than the time it takes for you to blink. And it has to do this reliably, repeatedly, at any dynamic from the softest pianissimo to a thundering fortissimo, 10,000 times in a single concert. Here's the thing most people don't realize. This complexity isn't accidental. It wasn't created by engineers who couldn't find a simpler solution. Every single part exists because someone discovered that without them, the piano couldn't do something that musicians needed it to do. So today, I want to walk you through why this instrument is built the way it is, not as a technical lecture, but as a story. Because once you understand what each part is actually solving for you, you'll never play the piano or hear it the same way again. Let's start with the part that matters most, the action. This is the mechanical system that sits between your fingers and the strings in a grand piano. The action alone contains thousands of individual components. Every single key has its own set of moving parts. The key itself, the whip-in, the jack, the repetition lever, the hammer, the damper. Now, here's where it gets fascinating. The piano is a mechanical mechanism called the escapement. It was a harpsichord builder, Bartolomeo Cristofori, who around the turn of the 18th century came up with this technology that it simply allows a hammer to escape the string instead of plucking, which is what happens inside a harpsichord. He named his instrument gravacembalo col piano e forte, which translates to harpsichord with soft and loud. Then the name was shortened to pianoforte and eventually the piano. So, Cristofori is credited with inventing the piano, but it goes so much deeper than that. In 1821, Sebastian Aurard developed the double escapement, which was a massive technological breakthrough for classical music particularly, and allowed composers like Franz Liszt and Frédéric Chopin to write music with lightning-fast note repetitions and complex trills. The mechanism has a specialized part called a repetition lever alongside the standard jack. When you play a note on a grand piano, the hammer strikes the strings and drops down where it is caught by a back check. If you lift your finger just a tiny bit, only releasing the key about halfway, the repetition spring and lever immediately force the jack back underneath the hammer knuckle. The result is the action resets instantly. You can play the exact same note over and over again with incredible speed without ever having to let the key return to its fully rested position. So, when you're playing on a grand piano, you have a full double escapement literally at your fingertips, giving you maximum mechanical repetition speed and subtle dynamic control. Now, uprights, with very few exceptions, don't have anything like this technology, which is why a grand piano can repeat a single note up to 15 times a second, while a traditional upright maxes out at maybe 7 or 10 repetitions per second. Before the escapement, keyboard instruments had one fundamental limitation. You couldn't repeat notes quickly. The hammer would bounce back and forth, and the player had no real control over when the next note would speak. The double escapement solved this by allowing the hammer to disconnect from the string at the precise moment it strikes, so it bounces freely without being held back. Then the repetition lever catches it on the way down, ready to fire again before the key is even fully risen. This provides not only speed, but far greater control. Watch and listen to the incredible range a modern piano action is capable of. That's the escapement at work. Without it, that playing is physically impossible. Chopin, Liszt, Ravel, none of them could have composed the music they did without this one mechanical solution. That's not complexity for its own sake. That's complexity in the service of music. Now, let's talk about the hammers, because this is where most people are surprised. The hammer doesn't touch the strings and stay there. It strikes and immediately bounces away. The note continues sounding not because the hammer is in contact with the string, but because the string is vibrating freely. If the hammer stayed pressed against the string, the sound would be completely dead. In fact, early keyboard instruments like the clavichord worked this way. That also had some advantages, like being able to impart vibrato on individual notes by moving the keys. That's why the clavichord was Bach's favorite keyboard instrument. However, it was so quiet that it was nothing more than a personal keyboard. In performance, he played harpsichord and organ, which were fully developed instruments at that time. Unlike on the clavichord, on the piano, you have control only of the attack of the note, but it allows far greater volume on the piano. The hammer has to escape, has to get out of the way. Within milliseconds of the strike and the felt covering that hammer, it's not there for decoration. The density, the hardness, the shape of that felt determines the tone quality of each note on the piano. When a technician voices a piano, adjusting the tone to be brighter or more mellow, what they're actually doing is reshaping and treating that felt using needles to open the fibers and lacquer to harden them. The entire tonal personality of the instrument lives in a small pad of wool, traveling at high speed toward metal strings. That's the piano's voice. Here's something most students learn to take for granted without ever thinking about. When you lift your finger from a key, the note stops. Why? It's because of the dampers. Every note on the piano, except for the very highest notes, which decays so quickly anyway, all the other notes, they have felt pads sitting on top of each set of strings. The moment the key in question is released, that pad drops back onto the string and stops the sound. And when you press the sustain pedal, the right pedal, you're physically lifting every single damper off of all the strings simultaneously, which means every note you play continues to vibrate and interact with every other string in the piano. The sympathetic resonance you hear when the sustain pedal is engaged, those aren't just the notes you've played. Every string in the piano that shares a harmonic relationship with your notes begins to sing along. I'm going to show you here. So if I play a note without the pedal, it sounds like this. But if I push down the pedal, then play the note, listen how it echoes all the other strings sympathetically vibrating. That's why a great concert grand can fill a hall with sound. You're not hearing just the strings of the notes that are played. You're hearing the entire instrument resonating as one body. And that's entirely the result of the damper system, which most people think of simply as the pedal. And this is something I want every piano buyer to understand. Not all actions are created equal, and the differences are not trivial. A grand piano action uses gravity. The hammer is horizontal, it strikes upward and returns to its rest position by falling back down under its own weight. This is fast, precise, and incredibly responsive to light touch. Now, an upright piano action has to fight gravity. The hammer strikes horizontally and returns to rest using springs. Now, springs work perfectly well, but they don't offer the same speed of repetition, and they don't give the same sensitivity at very low dynamics. The very softest passages, like the notes that float above the silence, they're simply harder to control on an upright action. This is one of the reasons why all pianists eventually outgrow even the finest upright piano. It's not snobbery, it's mechanics. The grand piano action allows your fingers to create sounds that a less sophisticated upright mechanism cannot, and here's the really good news, this is something you can actually feel the moment you sit down at a well-regulated instrument. The action speaks to you. When someone asks me about evaluating a used piano, the first thing I do, aside from checking the soundboard, isn't look at the finish or check the strings. I sit down and play very softly. The response to light touch tells me everything about the condition and quality of the action. Let me show you what a well-regulated action actually feels like in practice. Notice the range from barely a whisper to a full voice and every gradation in between. That's just not my fingers. That's 10,000 parts, 12,000 parts working in perfect concert. Every one of them doing exactly what they were designed to do. When an action is poorly regulated, when the tolerances are off, when the hammers aren't balanced, when the escapement doesn't trigger consistently, you feel it as resistance, uneven touch, dead spots, notes that don't speak at low dynamics, notes that fire too early or too late. The music that should flow becomes a mechanical exercise in working around the instrument. A great technician, a great piano, removes those obstacles entirely. You forget the mechanism, you only hear the music. What this means for piano buyers, here's what decades of selling pianos has taught me about this subject. The number that matters isn't the price on the tag or the brand name on the foldboard. The number that matters is how recently was this instrument regulated? An older Steinway or Büsendorfer or Baldwin with a freshly regulated action will outperform a brand new mid-level piano in terms of expressiveness and responsiveness. Every time, as long as it isn't worn out. And here's the exception that surprises most buyers. Regulation is not a permanent condition. It deteriorates with use, with humidity, with changes, and with the age. A piano that felt magnificent when it was new may feel sluggish and uneven after 10 years of use. The mechanical complexity that makes this instrument capable of such expression requires ongoing maintenance to remain in calibration. This is actually why when you're considering a piano, the cost of regulation should always be factored into your decision. A piano that needs a full regulation may require a significant investment on top of the purchase price. And if the parts are worn, a proper regulation may not even be possible. A well-maintained instrument in good condition with recent service is almost always the better value, even if the sticker price is higher on a new piano. And even brand new pianos don't usually come out of the factory anywhere close to the potential. Few dealers even recognize this unless they play at a high level, and finding technicians who can perform this kind of work can be a tremendous challenge. Now, I'm genuinely curious, how many of you have had your piano regulated recently? Or have you ever had a technician walk you through your action and explain what they're adjusting and why? I've seen the look on students' faces the moment they understand what's actually happening inside the instrument they've been playing for years. It changes how you practice it. It changes how you listen, and it changes what you notice and ask for the next time you're evaluating a piano to buy. It also changes how you maintain your piano. Leave me your comments about your experiences here at livingpianos.com or on YouTube. And if you have questions about your own piano's action, what to look for, when to regulate, what to ask your technician, put them in the comments or contact me directly, robert@livingpianos.com. And if you found this useful, subscribe and share with people you know who love the piano. I have an extensive series covering every aspect of piano ownership, technique, selection, as well as tips on how to improve your piano playing. And if you're thinking about your next instrument, livingpianos.com is your online piano store. We help people find the right piano every day. I'm Robert Estrin. Thanks for watching and keep playing.